Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey through the shadows of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle back, perhaps pull a soft blanket closer, and allow your mind to drift into a world far more ancient and unforgiving than our own. You are safe here, in your comfortable present, wrapped in the certainty of central heating and insulated walls, as we explore a time when warmth was earned through cunning, cooperation, and an intimate knowledge of survival that we can barely comprehend today. If you want to help me to keep doing these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. It motivates and helps me keep bringing videos in this format. If you'd like to hear about a specific topic, leave a comment below and I'll show you in the video when your topic is chosen. Imagine, if you will, stepping back not merely centuries, but tens of thousands of years, to a time when our closest relatives walked this earth alongside early modern humans. Picture yourself transported to approximately 40,000 years ago, during what scientists now call the last glacial maximum's precursor, a period when ice sheets stretched their frozen fingers across vast territories of Europe and Asia, and when the very air itself seemed to crystallize with each breath. This was the world of the Neanderthals, those robust, intelligent beings who called the harsh landscapes of Ice Age Europe their home.
Tonight's journey will take you through 4 distinct windows into their world. We'll begin by immersing ourselves in the daily rhythm of a Neanderthal family as they navigate the relentless cold, feeling the weight of survival pressing against every decision, every moment of their existence. Then we'll follow the story of Shanidar I, a remarkable individual whose life reveals the depth of Neanderthal compassion and community care. Our third segment will explore the mysterious world of their burial practices and spiritual beliefs, those haunting glimpses into minds that pondered mortality and meaning. Finally, we'll contrast the lives of different Neanderthal groups, some thriving in relative abundance, others clinging to survival's edge, painting a complete picture of how these ancient people adapted to their frozen world. As you listen tonight, let your modern worries fade like morning mist. Allow yourself to be grateful for the simple miracle of your warm shelter, your reliable food sources, your freedom from the constant vigilance that once defined human existence. Close your eyes and prepare to witness life at its most elemental, where every sunrise was a victory, and every sunset brought both relief and the promise of another night's struggle against the endless, beautiful, terrible cold. The first pale light of winter dawn creeps across the frozen landscape like a reluctant promise. Imagine yourself awakening not to the gentle hum of central heating, but to the sharp bite of air so cold it seems to crystallize in your lungs.
You are nestled deep within a cave that your family has called home for 3 seasons now. Its limestone walls blackened by countless fires, its floor worn smooth by the passage of bare feet and animal hides dragged across stone. The scent that fills your nostrils is complex: smoke from dying embers, the musky warmth of sleeping bodies pressed close together, the metallic tang of blood from yesterday's hunt still lingering on stone tools, and underneath it all, the clean, sterile smell of snow and ice that has settled into everything like an unwelcome guest. Your family stirs around you in the dim light filtering through the cave mouth. There are 8 of you sharing this shelter: yourself, your mate, 3 children ranging from a nursing infant to a boy of perhaps 12 winters, your elderly mother whose joints crack audibly in the cold, and 2 others from your extended clan who have sought refuge here as the great ice sheets continue their relentless advance southward. Each breath creates small clouds of vapor that dissipate quickly in the frigid air, and you can hear the subtle sounds of bodies shifting beneath piles of fur, mammoth hide, reindeer pelts, and the precious bearskin that your father once wrestled from its original owner in a battle that left him scarred but victorious. The rhythm of awakening is as old as your people themselves.
No one speaks yet. Sound carries far in the thin air, and there are other predators who share this harsh landscape. Creatures for whom your family might represent not companionship, but opportunity. Your mate rises first, her movements careful and deliberate as she navigates around the sleeping forms. She moves to the fire pit at the cave's center, where a few precious embers still glow like tiny orange eyes in the ash. With practiced efficiency, born of countless similar mornings, she feeds these embers with dry grass and small twigs, coaxing them back to life with gentle breath that creates small puffs of steam in the cold air. The fire's resurrection is always a moment of quiet celebration, though joy here is measured in subtle gestures, a slight relaxation in your mate's shoulders, the way your children unconsciously shift closer to the growing warmth, the almost inaudible sigh of relief from your aging mother. Fire is life itself in this frozen world, the thin line between existence and the permanent sleep that claims so many during these harsh seasons. You have seen entire families simply disappear between one thaw and the next, their caves found empty except for scattered bones and the lingering smell of desperation. As warmth begins to spread through the cave like a gentle tide, the daily assessment begins. Your eldest son, a boy whose childhood has been carved away by necessity, examines the cave mouth for signs of overnight visitors.
Snow has drifted against the hide barrier you construct each evening, and he carefully brushes it away while scanning the white expanse beyond for tracks that might tell stories of danger or opportunity. Yesterday's storm has erased most traces of movement, leaving behind a pristine canvas that will soon be marked by the day's activities. Your mate begins the morning inventory, a ritual as essential as breathing. She counts the remaining portions of dried meat hanging from wooden spikes driven into the cave wall, calculates how many days of sustenance remain, measures with experienced eyes the dwindling pile of preserved berries and nuts gathered during the brief abundance of autumn. Her fingers trace the edges of water containers carved from stone and lined with animal stomach, noting with concern that ice has formed on the surface despite the fire's presence. Everything must be rationed, measured, weighed against the unknown length of winter still ahead. The baby's cry pierces the morning quiet, a sound that brings both tenderness and anxiety to every adult face. In this world, a crying infant is not merely expressing discomfort, but potentially announcing your location to every predator within hearing distance. Your mate quickly brings the child to her breast, and the cave fills with the soft sounds of nursing, a gentle reminder that life continues even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The baby's warmth against her chest is precious beyond measure, a small furnace of hope in the endless cold.
Your mother, despite her age and the stiffness that grips her joints each morning like iron bands, begins her own essential tasks. Her weathered hands sort through the collection of tools that represent your family's technological heritage. Sharp-edged flint knives passed down through generations, bone needles carved with infinite patience, scrapers that can transform a raw hide into life-saving clothing. Each tool tells a story of survival, of problems solved and challenges overcome through intelligence and determination that your species has been perfecting for hundreds of thousands of years. The eldest boy returns from his reconnaissance with news whispered in the private language of gestures your family has developed. His hands speak of rabbit tracks leading toward the forest edge, of wind patterns that suggest clear weather for at least part of the day, of the absence of the large paw prints that would indicate the presence of cave lions or other apex predators who view your family as potential prey rather than fellow survivors. This information is processed instantly by every adult, becoming part of the complex calculations that will determine today's survival strategy. As the morning progresses and the fire builds to a steady warmth, the cave transforms from a simple shelter into a complex workshop where every member has a role defined by age, ability, and the harsh logic of survival. Your mate begins the careful process of preparing what will serve as the day's first meal. Thin strips of dried mammoth meat, softened in melted snow, mixed with a small portion of preserved berries to provide the sugars that will fuel today's activities. The portions are small, calculated with the precision of a mathematician, because waste in this environment is not merely foolish, but potentially fatal. The middle children, a boy of perhaps 8 winters and a girl slightly younger, begin their own morning responsibilities. They gather the scattered bones from previous meals, bones that serve multiple purposes in your resource-scarce world. Some will be cracked open to access the nutritious marrow within, others will be shaped into tools or weapons, and still others will be saved to fuel the fire when wood becomes impossible to find. Nothing in your world has a single purpose. Everything must be used, reused, and used again until it crumbles into dust. Your own morning assessment focuses on the larger picture, the cave's security, the weather patterns developing outside, the complex social dynamics that hold your small group together under pressures that would shatter most modern communities. You examine the wooden spears that lean against the cave wall, checking for cracks that might mean the difference between a successful hunt and a catastrophic failure. Your hands trace the hafts of stone axes, feeling for looseness that could prove deadly at a crucial moment. These weapons are extensions of your own body, tools that your hands have shaped and reshaped countless times, intimate as lovers in their familiarity. The morning light gradually strengthens, though even full daylight in this ice-bound world carries a quality of perpetual twilight. The sun, when it appears, seems distant and cold, a pale disk that provides illumination but precious little warmth. Through the cave mouth, you can see the landscape that has become your universe. Rolling hills covered in snow so deep that entire trees disappear beneath its weight. Distant mountains that gleam like broken teeth against a sky the color of old bone. It is beautiful in its terrible way, a world sculpted by forces so vast and indifferent that your entire species seems like nothing more than a brief thought in the mind of the earth itself. Yet within this apparent desolation, your trained eyes can read signs of life that would be invisible to most modern humans. The slight depression that marks a trail used by migrating reindeer, the barely visible wisps of steam that indicate hot springs where both prey and predators might gather, the particular quality of snow that suggests underground water sources. Your survival depends on this intimate knowledge of the landscape, this ability to read the subtle language of ice and wind and stone that your people have been learning for millennia. The morning meal, when it comes, is consumed in near silence. Each bite chewed slowly to extract maximum nutrition and extend the feeling of fullness as long as possible. The children eat first, always first, because they represent the future of the group and require calories for growth as well as survival. then the adults, and finally, the elderly, though your mother's portion is never significantly smaller, despite the harsh mathematics of survival. This hierarchy is not cruelty, but wisdom, the accumulated knowledge of countless families who have faced similar choices and found ways to preserve the essential core of human compassion, even in circumstances that seem designed to strip it away. As the pale sun climbs toward its brief zenith, your family faces the central challenge that has defined every day of their existence: the acquisition of resources necessary for survival. The morning's careful assessment has revealed both opportunities and dangers, and now the complex choreography of Ice Age survival begins in earnest. You can feel the weight of decisions settling over the cave like an invisible blanket, each choice carrying consequences that could ripple through days or weeks ahead. Your mate and the two older children will remain at the cave today, a decision reached through the subtle communication of glances and gestures that substitutes for lengthy discussion in a world where sound can mean death.
The baby requires constant warmth and attention, and your mother's increasingly stiff joints make travel treacherous on terrain that can shift from solid ground to deadly trap with a single misstep. But remaining at the cave is far from passive safety. It means maintaining the life-sustaining fire, processing the materials gathered from previous expeditions, and standing ready to defend the family's most precious assets should danger approach during the hunter's absence. You and your eldest son prepare for the hunt with rituals that blend practical necessity with the deeper human need for ceremony and meaning. Your spears receive careful inspection, their stone points examined for hairline cracks that could mean the difference between clean kills and wounded animals that might turn dangerous in their death throes. The wooden shafts are tested for balance and straightness, while the sinew bindings that hold point to shaft are checked for signs of wear that could result in catastrophic failure at the moment of greatest need. The boy's excitement at being included in the hunt is carefully contained beneath a veneer of adult seriousness that he has been cultivating since his voice began to change. For him, this represents not merely the opportunity to contribute to the family's survival, but a crucial step in his transformation from child to full member of the adult community. His hands shake slightly as he adjusts his grip on his smaller spear, and you recognize in his nervous energy the same mixture of anticipation and terror that you felt during your own first serious hunts decades ago. The preparation extends beyond weapons to the complex layering of clothing that will mean the difference between productive hunting and death by exposure. Against your skin goes a soft inner layer of rabbit fur, carefully sewn with bone needles and sinew thread into a garment that fits close enough to trap warm air while remaining flexible enough to allow the quick movements that hunting demands. Over this comes a heavier layer of deer hide, tanned with a mixture of brain matter and plant materials until it achieved a suppleness that modern leatherworkers would admire. The outer layer is mammoth hide, thick enough to turn aside the claws of predators and heavy enough to provide insulation that can keep core body temperature stable even in the most brutal conditions. Your feet are wrapped in multiple layers as well. Soft inner socks of woven plant fibers, surrounded by carefully fitted leather boots lined with fur and sealed against moisture with animal fat rendered over countless fires. These boots represent weeks of careful work, and their construction involves knowledge passed down through generations of ancestors who learned through trial and error what combinations of materials could keep feet functional in conditions that would cause frostbite within minutes if inadequately protected.
The hunting party's departure is marked by a brief ritual of farewell that acknowledges the reality that not all departures result in safe returns. Your mate presses her forehead against yours for a long moment, sharing breath and warmth, while silently communicating the depth of connection that makes survival meaningful rather than merely mechanical. Your mother touches your shoulder with fingers that once taught you to knap flint and track game, and in that touch is the weight of all her accumulated wisdom and the hope that it will prove sufficient for today's challenges. The landscape you enter upon leaving the cave's warmth is both magnificent and terrifying in its vast indifference. Snow stretches in every direction like a frozen ocean, its surface sculpted by wind into patterns that can hide deadly crevasses or create false pathways that lead nowhere. The air is so cold that each breath requires conscious effort, and the moisture from your exhalations immediately begins to freeze on the fur around your face, creating a growing mask of ice that must be regularly broken away to prevent breathing difficulties. Your son follows in your footsteps with the concentrated attention of someone whose life depends on learning every subtle lesson the landscape has to offer. You point out the signs that reveal the stories written in snow, the four-toed tracks of a lynx that passed sometime during the night, heading toward the river valley where fish might still be found in unfrozen pools.
The delicate impressions left by ptarmigan, ground birds, whose white winter plumage makes them nearly invisible against the snow, but whose meat provides essential protein and whose feathers serve crucial roles in maintaining warm clothing and bedding. The tracks you seek, however, are larger and more significant. The deep impressions left by reindeer, whose migration routes have brought them within range of your family's hunting capabilities. These animals represent not merely food, but a complex array of resources that can sustain your group for weeks. Their meat provides protein and fat essential for maintaining body heat in sub-zero temperatures. Their hides become clothing, shelter materials, and containers. Their bones transform into tools, needles, and fuel for fires. Their antlers provide material for weapons and implements whose design represents thousands of years of accumulated technological knowledge. The tracking itself requires skills that modern humans would find almost supernatural. You read in the depth and spacing of hoofprints not merely the direction of travel, but the size and health of individual animals, the speed at which they were moving, and most importantly, which members of the herd might be vulnerable to hunters armed with primitive weapons and relying on strategy rather than overwhelming technological advantage. A slight drag mark beside one set of prints suggests an animal favoring one leg, potentially weakened by injury or age.
The spreading of toes in certain tracks indicates animals carrying extra weight, either pregnant females or individuals who have been successful in finding food sources during the harsh winter months. As you follow the trail, your awareness expands to encompass the entire ecosystem of survival that surrounds your family. You show him how to read the subtle signs that indicate safe passage versus dangerous terrain, the way snow settles differently over solid ground compared to areas where underground water might create hidden hazards, the particular quality of light that reveals ice-covered streams where a single misstep could result in soaking that would mean death within hours unless immediate action could restore warmth and dryness. The wind patterns that indicate approaching weather changes, knowledge that could mean the difference between successful return to shelter and being caught in a storm that might last for days. The hunt itself, when you finally locate the small group of reindeer, becomes a complex exercise in patience, strategy, and precise timing. These animals have survived the winter thus far through their own sophisticated understanding of danger and opportunity. Their senses are finely tuned to detect the presence of predators, and their survival instincts have been honed by countless generations of ancestors who learned to navigate the hostile environment through vigilance and quick response to threats. You and your son separate, moving with infinite care through the sparse cover provided by wind-sculpted snowdrifts and the occasional stunted tree or large boulder. Communication between you relies entirely on hand signals and subtle movements that would be invisible to anyone lacking your shared vocabulary of survival.
The boy's nervousness is now channeled into hyper-awareness. His senses expanded beyond their normal limits by the adrenaline of genuine danger and the knowledge that failure could mean his family goes hungry for another day. The selection of target requires balancing multiple competing factors. The largest animal would provide the most resources, but would also be the most difficult to bring down with the primitive weapons at your disposal, and the most dangerous if wounded but not killed. The smallest might be easier to kill, but would provide insufficient return for the energy and risk invested in the hunt. The ideal target is the reindeer, whose tracks suggested possible injury, an animal large enough to provide significant resources, but potentially vulnerable enough to be taken down by two hunters working in careful coordination. The attack, when it comes, must be swift and decisive. Reindeer are capable of running at speeds that would quickly carry them beyond reach of pursuit, and their powerful hooves can inflict serious damage on hunters who fail to maintain proper distance and positioning. Your spear must find its mark with the first throw, striking vital organs that will bring the animal down quickly while minimizing its suffering and the risk it poses to the hunting party.
Your son's role is to position himself for a follow-up attack if your initial strike fails to achieve immediate success, a responsibility that requires him to overcome natural fear and function as a reliable partner in circumstances where hesitation could prove fatal. The moment of the kill brings both relief and a complex mixture of emotions that modern hunters rarely experience. The death of this animal means continued life for your family, but it also represents the ending of a life that struggled as hard as your own to survive in circumstances that test every living thing to its limits. The reindeer's final breath creates a small cloud of vapor that dissipates quickly in the cold air, and you place your hand on its still warm flank in a gesture that acknowledges both gratitude and respect for the sacrifice that enables your people's survival. The work that follows the kill requires skills and knowledge as complex as those needed for the hunt itself. The animal must be processed quickly and efficiently before the extreme cold makes the work impossible and before scavengers arrive to dispute possession of the precious resources. Your stone knives, carefully maintained and sharpened over countless uses, slice through hide and flesh with surprising efficiency. Each cut is planned and purposeful, designed to preserve maximum value from every part of the animal, while working within the constraints imposed by sub-zero temperatures and the need to remain constantly alert for potential dangers. The boy watches intently as you demonstrate the proper techniques for field dressing, his memory storing away lessons that may determine his own family's survival in years to come. The way to make the initial incision that allows access to internal organs without puncturing the stomach or intestines, whose contents could contaminate valuable meat. The proper method for removing the hide in sections that will provide maximum utility when processed into clothing or shelter materials. The identification and careful preservation of organs whose nutritional content will provide essential vitamins and minerals unavailable from muscle meat alone. The journey back to the cave becomes an exercise in endurance and vigilance. The fresh meat scent creates an invisible trail through the air that will attract every predator within miles, from the smallest weasels to the massive cave bears, whose strength and ferocity make them among the most dangerous creatures in your frozen world. The weight of the meat and hide strains muscles already taxed by the day's exertions, But stopping to rest means increased exposure to both cold and predators, a calculated risk that must be weighed against the gradual exhaustion that threatens efficient movement and quick responses to danger. Your son proves his growing maturity by maintaining pace and alertness despite the physical demands of carrying his portion of the day's harvest.
His eyes constantly scan the landscape for signs of danger, while his ears strain to detect sounds that might indicate the approach of competing predators or changes in weather conditions that could trap the hunting party away from shelter. The boy's transformation from child to adult hunter is taking place with each step through the snow, each lesson learned through direct experience with circumstances that allow no margin for error or second chances. The return to the cave as afternoon light begins its rapid fade toward evening brings relief so profound that it momentarily overwhelms every other sensation. The familiar dark mouth of your shelter appears like a beacon of safety in the vast white wilderness, and the thin tendril of smoke rising from within speaks of warmth, family, and the continuation of life in defiance of the hostile world that surrounds your small sphere of human existence. Your legs, heavy with exhaustion and cold, find renewed strength as you approach the place where survival transforms from struggle into something approaching comfort. Your mate emerges from the cave's depths before you reach the entrance, her silhouette framed against the warm glow of firelight that spills from within like liquid amber. Her face shows the complex mixture of relief and residual anxiety that marks every successful return from the day's dangerous work.
In her eyes, you read the story of her own day. Hours spent in constant vigilance, ears tuned to every sound that might indicate approaching danger, hands busy with the countless tasks that maintain the infrastructure of survival, mind calculating and recalculating the resources that stand between her family and the permanent sleep that claims so many during these brutal months. The successful hunt creates a temporary transformation in the cave's atmosphere, lifting spirits in ways that transcend the mere addition of fresh meat to depleted stores. The youngest children, who have learned to contain their natural exuberance during times of scarcity, allow themselves brief moments of celebration as they examine the day's harvest. Their small hands trace the reindeer's thick winter coat, feeling the dense fur that will soon become part of their own protection against the cold. They marvel at the size of the animal that their father and brother have brought home, their young minds beginning to comprehend the complex skills and knowledge required to transform living beast into life-sustaining resources. Your mother, despite the stiffness in her joints that makes every movement an exercise in controlled pain, immediately begins the evening's most critical work, the processing of fresh meat in ways that will preserve its nutritional value while extending its utility across many meals. Her weathered hands move with the confidence of decades of experience as she begins the careful dissection that will transform the reindeer into a collection of specialized resources.
The prime cuts will be consumed fresh, providing immediate nutrition and the psychological boost that comes from eating until truly satisfied, rather than merely maintaining subsistence levels. The evening meal preparation becomes a community effort that transforms the cave into a complex workshop where every family member contributes according to their abilities and experience. The fire, fed with additional fuel to accommodate the cooking requirements, blazes higher than it has in days, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls and filling the enclosed space with warmth
that penetrates deep into bones that have grown accustomed to perpetual cold. The light reveals details of daily life that daylight never illuminates. The careful arrangements of tools and materials that represent your family's entire technological heritage. The sleeping areas defined by collections of furs and hides. The storage spaces where precious resources await future need. Your mate begins the complex process of roasting portions of fresh meat over the fire, using techniques perfected through countless similar evenings. Long strips of muscle are skewered on sharpened sticks and positioned at precise distances from the flames, close enough to cook thoroughly, but not so close as to char the outside while leaving the interior raw. The fat that drips from the cooking meat is carefully collected in stone containers, where it will be saved for future use as fuel for lamps, waterproofing for clothing and equipment, and high-energy food during the lean periods that will inevitably come.
The children gather around the fire in a loose semicircle, their faces glowing in the warm light as they absorb lessons that will determine their chances of surviving to adulthood. Your eldest son demonstrates the proper care and maintenance of hunting spears, showing his younger siblings how to inspect the bindings that hold stone points to wooden shafts, how to identify wear patterns that indicate potential failure points, and how to make field repairs using materials that can be found or improvised during extended hunts. These are not academic exercises, but practical skills whose mastery represents the difference between successful hunts and potentially fatal equipment failures. The evening light filtering through the cave mouth takes on the particular quality that characterizes winter sunsets in this harsh climate. A brief blaze of orange and red that seems to concentrate all the day's accumulated warmth into a few precious minutes before surrendering to the deeper cold of night. You watch this daily transition with the appreciation of someone who has learned not to take any moment of beauty or comfort for granted, understanding that these brief respites from the struggle for survival are what make continued existence meaningful rather than merely mechanical. As darkness begins to settle over the landscape outside, your family's activities shift to accommodate the realities of night in a world where electric lighting exists only in the form of fire, and where warmth is a precious resource that must be carefully conserved and distributed. The cave mouth is sealed with a complex arrangement of hides and wooden supports that creates an insulating barrier against the brutal cold, while still allowing sufficient airflow to prevent the accumulation of dangerous levels of smoke from the central fire. This daily construction project requires the participation of every family member old enough to handle the materials, and its proper execution can mean the difference between comfortable sleep and a night spent battling hypothermia. The evening's storytelling begins as naturally as breathing, emerging from the comfortable exhaustion that follows successful completion of the day's survival tasks. Your mother's voice, roughened by decades of breathing smoke and cold air, begins to weave together the threads of memory and imagination that have sustained your people through countless similar nights. Her stories serve multiple purposes. They preserve the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. They strengthen the bonds that hold the family together under extreme stress. And they provide the mental stimulation that keeps human consciousness engaged and creative, even in circumstances that might otherwise reduce existence to purely mechanical repetition. Tonight's tale focuses on the great mammoth hunt of your grandfather's youth, a story that has been refined through countless tellings until it achieves the status of sacred narrative. The children listen with rapt attention as she describes the careful planning that preceded the hunt, the complex coordination required to drive a massive mammoth toward concealed hunters, and the days of celebration that followed the successful kill.
The children gather around the fire in a loose semicircle, their faces glowing in the warm light as they absorb lessons that will determine their chances of surviving to adulthood. Your eldest son demonstrates the proper care and maintenance of hunting spears, showing his younger siblings how to inspect the bindings that hold stone points to wooden shafts, how to identify wear patterns that indicate potential failure points, and how to make field repairs using materials that can be found or improvised during extended hunts. These are not academic exercises, but practical skills whose mastery represents the difference between successful hunts and potentially fatal equipment failures. The evening light, filtering through the cave mouth, takes on the particular quality that characterizes winter sunsets in this harsh climate. A brief blaze of orange and red that seems to concentrate all the day's accumulated warmth into a few precious minutes before surrendering to the deeper cold of night. You watch this daily transition with the appreciation of someone who has learned not to take any moment of beauty or comfort for granted, understanding that these brief respites from the struggle for survival are what make continued existence meaningful rather than merely mechanical. As darkness begins to settle over the landscape outside, your family's activities shift to accommodate the realities of night in a world where electric lighting exists only in the form of fire and where warmth is a precious resource that must be carefully conserved and distributed.
The children's bedtime preparation follows rituals that blend practical necessity with the human need for comfort and security. They arrange their sleeping furs in careful layers that will trap warm air while allowing moisture from perspiration to escape, preventing the dangerous accumulation of dampness that could lead to hypothermia during the long night hours. The youngest child receives extra attention and additional layers, while the oldest children take responsibility for ensuring that their smaller siblings are properly prepared for the night's challenges. Your own evening inspection of the cave's security measures is as thorough as a general's review of battlefield defenses. You check the stability of the entrance barrier, ensuring that it will withstand both the pressure of accumulating snow and the potential intrusion of predators who might be attracted by the sense of fresh meat and human habitation. The fire receives careful attention, banked with materials that will allow it to burn slowly through the night without requiring constant attention, but arranged so that it can be quickly revived if circumstances demand immediate warmth or light. The sounds of the cave as night settles around your family create a symphony of security that contrasts sharply with the dangerous silence of the world beyond the entrance barrier.
The gentle crackling of the banked fire, the soft breathing of sleeping children, the subtle sounds of bodies shifting beneath warm furs. These are the sounds of successful survival, of another day completed and another night begun with all family members safe and fed. Yet beneath this domestic tranquility lies the constant awareness that safety is temporary and must be earned anew with each passing day. Your mother's gentle snoring provides a rhythmic counterpoint to the night sounds, and in its steady pattern you hear the breathing of someone who has survived more harsh winters than most people could endure. Her presence in the cave represents not merely additional warmth and companionship, but a living repository of knowledge and experience that could prove crucial during the inevitable crises that winter will bring. Her weathered hands have guided your family through countless similar nights, and her continuing presence offers reassurance that human wisdom and determination can triumph over even the most hostile circumstances. The stars visible through small gaps in the entrance barrier shine with the particular brilliance that characterizes clear winter nights in unpolluted skies. These same stars have guided your people's migrations for countless generations, and their familiar patterns provide a sense of continuity and connection that transcends the immediate challenges of daily survival.
You trace the outlines of constellations whose names and stories have been passed down through generations of ancestors. Each star pattern associated with knowledge about seasonal changes, weather patterns, and the movement of game animals that your people depend upon for survival. As sleep begins to claim the adult members of your family, the cave settles into the quiet rhythms that will carry it through another night of survival. The fire continues its steady burn, consuming fuel with the measured pace that will extend warmth through the coldest hours before dawn. The entrance barrier stands firm against the wind that has begun to build outside, creating small whistling sounds that speak of weather systems moving across the frozen landscape. Inside the cave, 8 human beings continue the ancient struggle against extinction, their combined warmth and shared resources creating a small island of life in a world that seems designed to extinguish such fragile flames. Your mate's hand finds yours in the darkness, her fingers interlacing with yours in a gesture that communicates depths of connection and mutual dependence that transcend simple romance. In this harsh world, partnership means quite literally the difference between life and death, and the bonds that hold families together must be strong enough to withstand pressures that would destroy most modern relationships. Her presence beside you in the darkness represents not merely companionship, but shared commitment to the daily miracle of keeping each other alive in circumstances that offer no guarantees and precious few second chances.
The baby's occasional soft sounds create brief moments of tension as every adult ear strains to determine whether intervention is required. In this environment, a crying infant represents not merely a parental challenge, but a potential threat to the entire family's security. Yet the gentle sounds of contentment that characterize most of the night speak to the remarkable adaptability of human life. The way even the youngest and most vulnerable family members learn to thrive in circumstances that would challenge the hardiest adults. As the night deepens and the cold beyond the cave entrance reaches its most extreme levels, your family's collective warmth creates a microclimate that makes survival possible. The careful arrangement of sleeping bodies maximizes shared heat while maintaining individual comfort, and the strategic placement of furs and hides creates insulating layers that trap warm air close to skin that must be protected from the killing cold. This nightly reconstruction of comfort and security represents the culmination of thousands of years of human ingenuity applied to the fundamental challenge of staying alive in hostile environments. The dreams that come as exhaustion finally claims conscious awareness are filled with the images and sensations that have defined the day's experiences. The successful hunt replays itself in memory, reinforcing the lessons learned and the techniques that proved effective. The weight of meat carried through snow becomes transformed into symbols of accomplishment and security. The warmth of family gathered around the fire expands to encompass not merely immediate comfort, but hopes and plans for the survival challenges that tomorrow will inevitably bring. In sleep, as in waking, the fundamental reality remains unchanged. Another day survived, another night endured, another small victory claimed against the vast indifference of a frozen world that cares nothing for human hopes and dreams, but cannot quite extinguish the remarkable flame of human determination to continue existing despite all odds. In the rugged mountains of what we now call northern Iraq, in a cave that would one day yield treasures to archaeologists working tens of thousands of years in the future, there lived a man whose story would challenge every assumption about the nature of Neanderthal society
and the depths of human compassion possible in the harshest of circumstances. This individual, known to modern science as Shanidar I, walked the earth during a time when ice sheets stretched across vast portions of Europe and Asia, when survival depended not merely on individual strength and cunning, but on the willingness of communities to care for their most vulnerable members, even when such care demanded significant sacrifice.
Imagine yourself transported back approximately 60,000 years to a time when the Shanidar cave served as shelter for a group of Neanderthals who had chosen this particular location for its strategic advantages: protection from the elements, access to water sources, and commanding views of the valleys below where game animals followed ancient migration routes. The cave's entrance faces southeast, capturing the maximum benefit from the brief winter sun, while providing shelter from the harsh winds that sweep down from the higher elevations. Inside, the limestone walls bear the stains of countless fires, and the floor has been worn smooth by generations of feet that have found refuge within these protective walls. The man who would become known as Shanidar I was born into this world at a time when every birth represented a victory against overwhelming odds. Infant mortality rates that would horrify modern parents were simply accepted realities of existence. And those children who survived their first years did so through a combination of genetic resilience, family dedication, and sheer chance. Yet from his earliest moments, this individual showed signs of the challenges that would define his entire existence. Challenges that would test not only his own determination to survive, but his community's commitment to preserving the life of someone whose disabilities might have led other groups to make harsh decisions in the name of collective survival.
The first signs of what modern medicine would recognize as significant developmental abnormalities became apparent as the child grew from infant to toddler. His right arm showed clear signs of atrophy and malformation, with the bone structure suggesting either a congenital condition or trauma suffered so early in life that normal development was permanently affected. The arm hung useless at his side, and the muscles that should have developed to support normal function remained weak and underdeveloped. In a world where every individual's survival depended on their ability to contribute to the group's essential tasks, hunting, gathering, tool-making, defense, such a disability represented a challenge whose magnitude is difficult for modern people to comprehend. Yet his family and community made a choice that speaks to the deepest levels of human compassion and social cooperation. Rather than abandoning a child whose physical limitations made him a burden during the constant struggle for survival, they committed themselves to his care and development, finding ways to integrate him into the community's life despite his obvious disadvantages. This decision required not merely emotional commitment, but practical adaptations that demanded creativity, patience, and the kind of long-term thinking that modern observers often assume was beyond the capabilities of prehistoric peoples. As the boy grew into adolescence and then adulthood, his disabilities became more pronounced rather than less. His right arm remained essentially useless. The muscles atrophied to the point where the limb could provide no meaningful assistance in daily tasks.
More significantly, examination of his skull reveals evidence of trauma that occurred during his youth. A severe blow to the left side of his head that would have resulted in blindness in his left eye and likely caused additional neurological complications that affected his balance, coordination, and possibly his cognitive functions.
The injury shows clear signs of healing, indicating that he received care and protection during the vulnerable period of recovery, when infection or additional trauma could easily have proved fatal. The challenges faced by this individual in navigating daily life would have required constant adaptation and creativity. Simple tasks that other community members performed without conscious thought, climbing over rocky terrain, maintaining balance on icy surfaces, carrying tools and materials, became complex problems requiring careful planning and often assistance from others. His hunting capabilities were severely limited, though evidence suggests he may have participated in group hunts in supportive roles that utilized his intelligence and knowledge rather than physical prowess. The construction of tools, normally a task requiring the coordinated use of both hands, required him to develop alternative techniques that compensated for his disability. Yet perhaps most remarkably, this man not only survived to adulthood, but lived to an advanced age that few individuals achieved during this harsh period of human history.
Analysis of his remains suggests he reached his 40s, or possibly older, an extraordinary achievement for any Neanderthal, but particularly remarkable for someone whose disabilities made him dependent on community support for basic survival needs. His longevity speaks not merely to his own determination and adaptability, but to the sustained commitment of his community to his care and protection across decades of harsh winters and constant survival challenges. The evidence of his long life reveals a community that had developed sophisticated methods for caring for disabled members without compromising the group's overall survival prospects. During hunting expeditions, he likely remained at the cave site, contributing to essential tasks that could be performed despite his physical limitations. Maintaining fires, processing materials brought back by hunters, caring for children, and serving as a repository of knowledge and experience that could guide younger community members. His role may have evolved into something resembling a teacher or advisor, someone whose accumulated wisdom compensated for his physical limitations and provided value that justified the resources invested in his care. The social implications of his survival extend far beyond simple compassion. His presence within the community for decades suggests a level of social organization and forward thinking that challenges assumptions about Neanderthal capabilities. Caring for a disabled individual requires not merely good intentions, but practical systems for resource allocation, task distribution, and protection that must function effectively over extended periods. The community had to develop methods for ensuring that his needs were met while maintaining the efficiency necessary for group survival during the harshest conditions imaginable. His story also reveals important insights into Neanderthal understanding of individual value and community responsibility. Rather than viewing him as a burden whose needs competed with group survival, his community apparently recognized forms of contribution that extended beyond physical labor. His intelligence, memory, and accumulated experience represented resources that could benefit the entire group, and his care became an investment in preserving and transmitting knowledge that might prove crucial for future survival challenges. This sophisticated understanding of individual value within community contexts suggests cognitive and social capabilities that early researchers consistently underestimated. The archaeological evidence suggests that his disabilities may have led to innovations in tool use and daily life adaptations that benefited not merely him, but the entire community. When necessity forces the development of alternative methods for performing essential tasks, the resulting innovations often prove useful for other community members as well. His limitations may have driven his group to develop more efficient techniques for food processing, improved methods for tool construction and maintenance, or alternative approaches to resource management
that enhanced overall group survival prospects. The care he received throughout his life also reveals important information about Neanderthal medical knowledge and treatment capabilities. The healing patterns visible in his bones suggest that his injuries and disabilities received attention that went beyond simple acknowledgement of his condition.
His community appears to have understood principles of wound care, protection during recovery periods, and long-term management of chronic conditions that required ongoing attention. This medical knowledge, combined with the social commitment to his care, created conditions that allowed him not merely to survive, but to contribute meaningfully to community life across many decades. His advanced age at death raises intriguing questions about the circumstances that finally ended his remarkable life. Did he succumb to the accumulated effects of his disabilities and the harsh conditions that challenged even healthy individuals? Was his death the result of an accident or illness that his compromised physical condition made him unable to survive? Or did he simply reach the natural limits of longevity that few members of his species achieved, his death marking the end of a life that had already exceeded all reasonable expectations for survival in such challenging circumstances? The location and condition of his remains within the Shanidar cave suggest that his death was met with rituals and respect that honor his contributions to the community and acknowledge the significance of his extraordinary survival. The care taken in his burial reflects the same compassion and respect that characterized his treatment throughout life, suggesting that his community recognized in his story a testament to the possibilities of human cooperation and the value of preserving individual lives even when such preservation requires significant sacrifice and adaptation.
Modern analysis of his remains continues to reveal new insights into both his personal experience and the broader capabilities of Neanderthal society. Advanced imaging techniques show details of bone adaptation and muscle development that tell the story of a lifetime spent compensating for significant disabilities through creativity, determination, and community support. Chemical analysis of his bones reveals information about his diet and health status that provides clues about the care and nutrition he received throughout his life, care that appears to have been comparable to that provided to fully capable community members. The legacy of Shanidar I extends far beyond his individual story to challenge fundamental assumptions about prehistoric human societies and their treatment of vulnerable members. His survival demonstrates that compassion and social cooperation were not luxuries that early humans could afford only during periods of abundance, but essential characteristics that enabled communities to maintain their humanity even during the harshest survival challenges. His life provides evidence that intelligence, adaptability, and community commitment could triumph over physical limitations that might have seemed insurmountable. His story also reveals the sophisticated understanding of individual and community relationships that characterized Neanderthal society. Rather than viewing survival as a purely individual challenge or reducing community dynamics to simple calculations of resource allocation and physical contribution, his community demonstrated an appreciation for the complex ways that individuals could contribute to group welfare and the long-term benefits of maintaining social bonds that transcended immediate practical considerations.
This understanding enabled them to create social systems that preserved both individual dignity and community effectiveness under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The morning light that filtered through the Shanidar cave entrance each day brought with it a complex mixture of opportunity and challenge for the man whose story we now know through the careful analysis of bones that lay undisturbed for 60 millennia. Imagine yourself awakening not merely to the harsh realities of Ice Age survival,
but to those same challenges magnified by physical limitations that transformed every simple task into a careful negotiation between desire and capability, between the mind's intentions and the body's constraints. His awakening each morning began with the same assessment that marked the start of every Neanderthal's day. But for him, this evaluation carried additional layers of complexity that healthy individuals never needed to consider. The weather outside determined not merely what activities would be possible for the community as a whole, but which of those activities he might participate in, and which would require him to find alternative ways to contribute to the group's survival efforts. His useless right arm meant that tasks requiring bilateral coordination were impossible, while his blind left eye created spatial perception difficulties that made navigation over rough terrain dangerous and potentially fatal. Yet the morning routines that had developed around his needs spoke to a community that had learned to integrate his limitations into their daily survival strategies without compromising their own effectiveness.
His position near the cave's central fire was not accidental, but carefully chosen to maximize his ability to contribute to essential tasks while minimizing the risks posed by his disabilities. From this strategic location, he could monitor the fire's condition, feed it with fuel as needed, and serve as an early warning system for changes in weather or the approach of potential threats. His functioning senses had become hyper-acute through decades of compensation for his limitations, making him extraordinarily sensitive to subtle changes in air pressure, temperature, and the acoustic environment that could signal approaching dangers or opportunities. The community's morning food distribution revealed patterns of care and consideration that extended far beyond simple charity. His portions were not merely adequate, but carefully selected to provide the nutrition necessary for someone whose physical limitations meant that he could not always participate in the most strenuous activities that helped others maintain body heat and muscle mass. The choicest parts of meat, the organs rich in essential vitamins and minerals, the rendered fats that provided concentrated energy, these were shared with him not as gifts, but as recognition of his value to the community's survival and well-being. His role in the morning's tactical planning sessions demonstrated the sophisticated ways that Neanderthal communities could adapt to incorporate individuals whose contributions differed from the standard patterns of participation.
While others prepared weapons and planned hunting routes, he provided crucial intelligence about weather patterns, animal behavior, and resource locations that drew upon decades of careful observation and accumulated knowledge. His memory, unencumbered by the physical demands that occupied much of others' attention, had become a vast repository of information about seasonal cycles, animal migration patterns, the location of crucial resources, and the subtle environmental signs that could mean the difference between successful hunts and dangerous failures. The hunting expeditions that took most of the able-bodied adults away from the cave each day left behind a smaller group whose composition reflected the community's sophisticated understanding of complementary capabilities and mutual support. The man who would become known as Shanidar I often found himself in charge of this remaining group, his authority deriving not from physical dominance, but from the respect earned through decades of wise counsel and reliable judgment. Under his guidance, children learned essential skills, tools were maintained and repaired, and resources were processed and prepared for future use. His interactions with the community's children revealed perhaps the most touching aspects of his daily life and the most profound evidence of his integration into the social fabric of Neanderthal society. These young people, whose own survival depended on learning complex skills and knowledge systems before reaching physical maturity, found in him a patient teacher whose limitations had fostered extraordinary attention to detail and alternative approaches to problem solving.
His inability to demonstrate certain techniques through physical example had led him to develop verbal and visual teaching methods that may have been more effective than traditional hands-on instruction. The children gathered around him each day not merely for formal instruction, but for the stories and knowledge that he had accumulated over his remarkable lifetime. His tales of hunting expeditions he had witnessed, of harsh winters survived through careful planning and community cooperation, of successful innovations in tool-making and resource management, served multiple educational purposes. They transmitted practical survival knowledge, reinforced community values and social bonds, and provided the kind of mental stimulation that kept young minds engaged and creative even during the monotonous periods that characterized much of Ice Age survival. His teaching extended beyond storytelling to hands-on instruction in tasks that could be performed despite physical limitations. Tool maintenance and repair, the processing of plant materials into useful fibers, the preparation of adhesives and waterproofing compounds from animal and plant sources. These skills required intelligence and patience rather than physical strength, and his expertise in these areas made him an invaluable resource for community survival. Young people learned from him not merely the techniques themselves, but the problem-solving approaches and attention to quality that distinguished expert craftwork from amateur efforts. The afternoon hours, when hunting parties were away and the remaining community members settled into their various tasks, provided opportunities for the kind of detailed, careful work that suited his capabilities perfectly. His functioning left hand had developed extraordinary dexterity through decades of compensation for his disabled right arm, and this enhanced capability made him remarkably skilled at tasks requiring fine motor control and precise manipulation. The creation of bone needles, the careful shaping of stone tools, the intricate work of preparing sinew for use as thread and binding material. These activities utilized his strengths while providing essential resources for community survival. His workspace within the cave had evolved over the years into a sophisticated arrangement that maximized efficiency while accommodating his physical limitations. Tools were arranged within easy reach of his functioning hand. Materials were organized according to logical sequences of use, and lighting from the central fire was optimized to support the detailed work that formed his primary contribution to daily survival efforts. This personalized environment represented not merely individual adaptation, but community recognition of the value of his specialized skills and the wisdom of providing him with conditions that enabled maximum productivity. The social dynamics that surrounded his daily activities revealed the complex ways that Neanderthal communities balanced individual needs with collective survival requirements. His obvious limitations meant that certain assumptions about reciprocity and contribution had to be modified. Yet this modification occurred within a framework that preserved both his dignity and his motivation to contribute meaningfully to group welfare. Rather than being marginalized or treated as a burden, he occupied a respected position that acknowledged both his limitations and his unique capabilities. His relationships with other adult community members showed patterns of mutual respect and interdependence that challenged assumptions about prehistoric social structures. The hunters who departed each morning relied on his expertise in tool preparation and maintenance, trusting their lives to weapons and equipment that he had inspected and approved. The women who processed gathered materials sought his advice on techniques and quality standards that drew upon his accumulated experience and attention to detail. The elderly members of the community found in him a peer who understood the challenges of physical limitation while demonstrating that such challenges need not diminish individual worth or community contribution. The evening hours brought their own opportunities for meaningful participation in community life. As family groups gathered around the central fire to share the day's experiences and planned for tomorrow's challenges, his voice carried particular authority in discussions about resource management, weather prediction, and strategic planning. His memory for detail and his ability to see patterns that others might miss made his contributions to these planning sessions invaluable, and his opinions were sought and respected even by individuals whose physical capabilities far exceeded his own. His participation in evening social activities revealed the community's commitment to treating him as a full member rather than a dependent requiring care. He participated in the decision-making processes that determined hunting strategies, resource allocation, and responses to changing environmental conditions.
His voice was heard and valued in discussions about community relationships with neighboring groups, about the timing of seasonal migrations, and about the complex social dynamics that held the group together under extreme survival pressures. The care routines that had developed around his specific needs demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of disability and adaptation that characterized his community's approach to individual differences. His clothing was modified to accommodate his useless arm while maximizing warmth and protection. His sleeping arrangements were positioned to provide optimal access to fire warmth while ensuring his safety in case of emergency evacuation. His daily routines were structured to minimize risks while maximizing opportunities for meaningful contribution to community welfare. The medical attention that he received throughout his life revealed knowledge and techniques that challenged assumptions about Neanderthal healthcare capabilities. The management of his chronic conditions, the prevention of complications from his disabilities, and the ongoing assessment of his health status showed understanding of medical principles that went far beyond simple first aid or emergency treatment. His community had learned to recognize signs of infection, to manage pain and inflammation, and to provide the kind of ongoing supportive care that enabled him to maintain his health and functionality across many decades of challenging conditions. His personal relationships within the community showed the same complexity and depth that characterized other aspects of his social integration. Despite his physical limitations, he formed meaningful bonds with community members that went beyond simple caregiving relationships.
These connections involved mutual respect, shared interests, and the kind of emotional intimacy that makes community life meaningful rather than merely functional. His relationships with potential mates, with close friends, and with family members revealed a rich emotional life that flourished despite the constraints imposed by his disabilities. The innovations and adaptations that developed around his daily needs often benefited other community members as well, demonstrating the ways that accommodation for individual differences could drive broader improvements in community life. Tools and techniques developed to work around his limitations proved useful for other situations and individuals. Methods of resource processing that he had refined to accommodate his physical constraints turned out to be more efficient than traditional approaches. His influence on community practices extended far beyond the specific accommodations made for his disabilities. His legacy within the community was already being established during his lifetime through the knowledge and techniques he transmitted to younger generations. Children who learned from him would carry forward not merely specific skills, but approaches to problem-solving, adaptation, and community cooperation that would serve them throughout their own lives. His influence on community culture and practices would outlive his physical presence, embedding in the group's collective knowledge and social structures insights and innovations that drew upon his unique perspective and experience. The respect and affection that he commanded within his community were earned through decades of consistent contribution
and reliable presence during both good times and crises.
His steadiness during emergencies, his wisdom during periods of uncertainty, and his unfailing commitment to community welfare had established him as a figure whose value transcended simple calculations of physical capability. His community had learned to see in him not limitations, but different forms of strength, not burdens, but alternative approaches to the universal challenges of survival and meaning. As evening settled over the Shanidar cave each day, bringing with it the familiar routines of security preparation and community gathering, his presence among the family groups represented something profound about the nature of human society and the values that enable communities to flourish even under the harshest conditions. His survival and integration demonstrated that compassion and practical wisdom could coexist, that communities could be both efficient and caring, and that individual differences could become sources of strength rather than division when approached with intelligence, patience, and genuine respect for human dignity. The advancing years brought changes to the man known as Shanidar I that even his remarkable adaptability and his community's devoted care could not entirely offset. Imagine yourself witnessing the gradual transformation of someone who had already defied every reasonable expectation for survival in the harsh world of Ice Age existence, whose very presence had challenged assumptions about the limits of human compassion and the possibilities of community cooperation.
The signs of aging that marked his progression into what would be considered extreme old age for a Neanderthal were both subtle and profound, each change representing another milestone in a life that had already achieved the extraordinary. His hair, once the deep brown common to his people, had gradually lightened to the silver gray that marked the few individuals who survived long enough for their bodies to display the physical signatures of accumulated years. This color change was not merely cosmetic, but symbolic, representing the transformation of a community member from active contributor to living repository of wisdom and experience. In a society where written records did not exist and knowledge was preserved only in memory and oral tradition, the presence of elderly individuals like Shanidar I represented libraries of information that could not be replaced once lost to death or accident. The winter that would prove to be his last began like countless others he had survived, with the familiar preparation rituals that had sustained his community through decades of seasonal challenges. The cave's entrance was sealed against the bitter cold with the same careful attention to detail that had protected the group through previous harsh seasons. The central fire was banked with materials that would provide steady warmth through the long nights ahead. Food stores were inventoried and rationed according to calculations that balanced current needs against the uncertain duration of winter's grip on the landscape.
Yet those who knew him best could detect subtle changes in his participation in these familiar routines, small signs that suggested his remarkable resilience might finally be approaching its limits. His morning awakening during these final months required additional time and care, his aged joints responding more slowly to the demands of movement in the perpetual cold that characterized cave dwelling during winter's peak intensity. The community members, who had long since adapted their routines to accommodate his disabilities, now found themselves making further adjustments to account for the additional limitations that advanced age imposed upon his already compromised physical capabilities. Yet these adaptations were made with the same quiet efficiency and unstated affection that had characterized their care for him throughout his extraordinary lifetime. The children who had grown to adulthood under his tutelage now took on increasing responsibility for the tasks that he could no longer perform with his former reliability. Yet they approached these responsibilities not as burdens reluctantly assumed,
but as honors earned through years of patient learning and mutual respect. The transition from his active contribution to their assumption of his former roles occurred so gradually and naturally that it seemed to represent not decline, but evolution. The organic passage of knowledge and responsibility from one generation to the next that ensured community continuity across individual lifetimes. His teaching during these final seasons took on qualities that those who witnessed it would remember for the remainder of their own lives.
The stories he shared carried additional weight, as if he understood that opportunities for their telling were becoming limited, and each narrative must convey not merely information, but the deeper wisdom that could only come from a lifetime of careful observation and hard-won experience. His voice, though weakened by age and the accumulated effects of decades spent breathing smoke-filled air, carried an authority and depth that commanded attention even from community members who had heard the same stories countless times before. The technical knowledge that he imparted during these months seemed to flow with particular urgency, as if some internal awareness drove him to ensure that crucial skills and techniques would survive his passing. His instruction in tool-making became more detailed and systematic, with attention to nuances and variations that he had previously considered too advanced for younger learners. His guidance in resource management expanded to include sophisticated strategies for long-term planning and crisis response that drew upon situations and challenges he had witnessed over his decades of survival. His medical knowledge, accumulated through personal experience with injury and disability, as well as observation of community health challenges, was shared with particular care and precision. The respect with which community members treated his declining physical capabilities revealed the depth of understanding that had developed around the relationship between individual worth and community contribution. As his ability to perform certain tasks diminished, others seamlessly assumed these responsibilities, while ensuring that he retained meaningful roles that utilized his continuing strengths.
His position as advisor and decision-maker was not diminished by his physical limitations, but if anything, seemed to gain additional authority as community members recognized the finite nature of his availability and sought to maximize the benefits of his counsel while it remained accessible. The hunting parties that departed the cave each day during his final winter carried with them weapons and equipment that bore the marks of his craftsmanship and attention to quality. Tools whose reliability had been ensured by inspection processes that he had refined over decades of experience. Though he could no longer participate in the physical preparation of these implements, his knowledge of their construction and his ability to identify potential failure points remained sharp and valuable. Hunters trusted their lives to equipment that had received his approval, understanding that his expertise represented the accumulated wisdom of countless similar expeditions and the hard-won knowledge of what worked and what failed under extreme conditions. The evening gatherings that had long been highlights of cave life took on special significance during these final months, as community members seemed to sense that opportunities for shared time with their oldest and most experienced member were becoming precious and limited. The stories he told during these sessions carried additional emotional weight, not merely because of their content, but because of the recognition that each telling might be among the last. His listeners attended to his words with the heightened attention of those who understood they were witnessing something irreplaceable and finite.
The relationships he maintained with individual community members during his final period revealed the full depth and complexity of the social bonds he had formed over his remarkable lifetime. His interactions with former students who had become accomplished adults carried the satisfaction of a teacher who could see his influence continuing through their achievements and contributions. His connections with peers who had shared decades of survival challenges bore the particular intensity of shared experience and mutual respect earned through countless tests of character and capability. His bonds with the children who represented the community's future showed the gentle patience of someone who understood the importance of transmitting not merely knowledge, but values and perspectives that would guide decision-making long after his physical presence was no longer available. The medical attention he received during his decline demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of aging and end-of-life care that his community had developed. The management of his increasing pain and diminishing mobility showed knowledge of palliative techniques that went beyond simple symptom relief to encompass understanding of dignity, comfort, and quality of life considerations. The emotional support provided by family and community members revealed awareness that psychological well-being was as important as physical care in ensuring that his final period retained meaning and satisfaction, rather than becoming merely a prolonged process of decline.
His participation in community decision-making processes remained active and valued, even as his physical contributions diminished, with his counsel sought on questions of resource allocation, strategic planning, and responses to changing conditions. His opinions carried particular weight in discussions about long-term survival strategies and preparations for challenges that the community might face after his passing. His role evolved from active participant to advisory elder, but this transition enhanced rather than diminished his influence on community policies and practices. The innovations and techniques that had developed around his disabilities over the decades continued to benefit community life even as his own capabilities declined. The adaptive methods he had pioneered for accomplishing essential tasks with physical limitations proved useful for other community members facing temporary injuries or age-related changes in their own capabilities. The problem-solving approaches he had developed became part of the community's general toolkit for addressing challenges and obstacles. His influence on community practices and perspectives had become so thoroughly integrated into daily life that it would continue to shape group behavior and decision-making long after his individual contribution ended. The seasons that followed brought gradual but unmistakable signs that his remarkable journey was approaching its conclusion. The community's response to these changes revealed the depth of their affection and respect for someone who had taught them so much about resilience, adaptation, and the possibilities of human cooperation under extreme conditions. The care he received was not merely dutiful, but genuinely loving, reflecting relationships built over decades of shared challenges and mutual support. His declining health became a community concern, with resources and attention devoted to his comfort and well-being that demonstrated the value placed on his continuing presence among them. The final weeks of his life unfolded with a dignity and peace that seemed to reflect both his own acceptance of mortality and his community's commitment to ensuring that his passing would be as comfortable and meaningful as his life had been extraordinary. The cave that had sheltered him for so many decades became a place of quiet gathering, where family and friends could share time with him, express gratitude for his contributions, and receive final words of wisdom and encouragement. The fire that had provided warmth and light throughout his lifetime continued to burn steadily, its familiar crackling providing continuity and comfort during these transitional days.
His death, when it came, occurred surrounded by the people who had shared his remarkable journey and witnessed his extraordinary achievements in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. The community's response to his passing revealed the full measure of their recognition of his significance, not merely as an individual who had survived against overwhelming odds, but as someone whose life had demonstrated fundamental truths about human nature, community cooperation, and the possibilities of compassion under extreme conditions.
The grief they experienced was matched by pride in having been part of his story, and gratitude for the lessons his example had taught them about the values that make survival meaningful rather than merely mechanical. The burial preparations that followed his death showed the same careful attention and respect that had characterized his treatment throughout life. His body was arranged with dignity in a location within the cave that reflected his important position within the community hierarchy. The materials placed with him spoke to both his practical contributions and his spiritual significance within the group's understanding of life, death, and continuity. The rituals surrounding his interment reflected beliefs about the afterlife and the continuing influence of respected community members that revealed sophisticated theological and philosophical thinking. The impact of his passing on community life extended far beyond the immediate grief and adjustment required by the loss of such a central figure. His death marked the end of an era for the group, the conclusion of a chapter in their collective story that had been defined by his remarkable presence and influence. Yet the knowledge he had transmitted, the techniques he had developed, the values he had embodied, and the example he had set continued to shape community life in ways that ensured his influence would outlive his physical presence by generations.
The children who had learned from him carried forward not merely specific skills and knowledge, but entire approaches to problem-solving, adaptation, and community cooperation that bore the mark of his teaching and example. The adults who had worked alongside him for decades continued to apply principles and techniques that reflected his influence on their understanding of effectiveness, quality, and mutual support. The community's culture and practices had been permanently enriched by his contributions, creating a legacy that would continue to benefit future generations long after the specific memory of his individual story might fade from active recollection. The seasonal cycles that continued after his passing brought regular reminders of his influence and importance to community life. The tools and techniques he had developed continued to prove their value during hunting expeditions, resource processing activities, and the countless daily tasks that sustained group survival. The adaptive strategies he had pioneered remained part of the community's response to challenges and obstacles. The social practices he had helped establish continued to guide relationships and cooperation among community members facing their own survival challenges. The location of his burial within the Shanidar cave would eventually be discovered by archaeologists working thousands of years in the future, his remains providing crucial evidence about Neanderthal capabilities, social organization, and values that challenged long-held assumptions about the nature and possibilities of prehistoric human societies.
The story told by his bones would speak across vast spans of time to reveal the remarkable achievements possible when intelligence, determination, and community cooperation combine to address even the most challenging circumstances. His legacy extended beyond his immediate community to influence broader understanding of human nature and social organization. The example of his survival and integration provided evidence that compassion and practical efficiency could coexist successfully, that communities could maintain both competitive effectiveness and care for vulnerable members, and that individual differences could become sources of strength and innovation rather than division and burden when approached with wisdom, patience, and genuine respect for human dignity and potential. The broader implications of his story continued to resonate through the generations that followed, providing a model for how communities might balance individual needs with collective requirements, how societies might integrate members whose contributions differed from standard patterns, and how groups might maintain their humanity and values even under the most extreme survival pressures. The memory of his extraordinary achievement would be preserved not merely in the physical evidence that his remains provided to future researchers, but in the living practices and values that his community carried forward into their continued existence. The techniques he had developed, the knowledge he had preserved and transmitted, the social innovations he had inspired, and the example he had set would continue to influence community life in ways that ensured his contribution to human survival and flourishing extended far beyond the boundaries of his individual lifetime. His story had become part of the larger human story, a testament to the possibilities of adaptation, cooperation, and compassion that would inspire and guide future generations facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. Deep beneath layers of sediment that have accumulated over tens of thousands of years, scattered across cave systems and ancient living sites throughout Europe and Western Asia, lie traces of practices so profound and mysterious that they continue to challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. The evidence emerges slowly from the patient work of archaeologists, each carefully excavated burial site revealing new fragments of a puzzle that speaks to questions about consciousness, spirituality, and the meaning that our ancient relatives found in existence itself. Tonight, let us explore these whispers from the earth, these silent testimonies to beliefs and practices that transformed the simple biological fact of death into something approaching the sacred.
Imagine yourself standing at the entrance to La Chapelle aux Saints, a small cave in southwestern France where, more than a century ago, researchers first uncovered evidence that would fundamentally alter our understanding of Neanderthal society. The limestone chamber that had once sheltered a family group during the harsh winters of the last ice age had become, over the millennia, a repository of secrets about the inner lives of people whose robust bones and powerful muscles had long obscured recognition of their psychological and spiritual sophistication. The individual discovered there, an elderly man whose arthritis-twisted skeleton spoke of decades of survival in the most challenging conditions imaginable, had been laid to rest with a care and intentionality that suggested beliefs about death that extended far beyond simple disposal of the deceased. The positioning of his body within the cave revealed patterns that could not be explained by accident or convenience. His form had been carefully arranged in what appeared to be a sleeping position, knees drawn up toward his chest in a posture that suggested not the random collapse of death, but the deliberate arrangement of someone who might awaken from peaceful slumber. His orientation of his body followed directions that seemed to hold significance for his community, aligned with cave features or celestial directions in ways that implied understanding of spatial relationships that carried meaning beyond the purely practical.
The memory of his extraordinary achievement would be preserved not merely in the physical evidence that his remains provided to future researchers, but in the living practices and values that his community carried forward into their continued existence. The techniques he had developed, the knowledge he had preserved and transmitted, the social innovations he had inspired, and the example he had set would continue to influence community life in ways that ensured his contribution to human survival and flourishing extended far beyond the boundaries of his individual lifetime. His story had become part of the larger human story, a testament to the possibilities of adaptation, cooperation, and compassion that would inspire and guide future generations facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. Deep beneath layers of sediment that have accumulated over tens of thousands of years, scattered across cave systems and ancient living sites throughout Europe and Western Asia, lie traces of practices so profound and mysterious that they continue to challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. The evidence emerges slowly from the patient work of archaeologists, each carefully excavated burial site revealing new fragments of a puzzle that speaks to questions about consciousness, spirituality, and the meaning that our ancient relatives found in existence itself. Tonight, let us explore these whispers from the earth, these silent testimonies to beliefs and practices that transformed the simple biological fact of death into something approaching the sacred.
This commitment to ceremonial practices during periods of extreme survival stress reveals sophisticated thinking about identity, community, and the meaning of individual and collective existence. The geographical distribution of Neanderthal burial sites tells its own story about the widespread nature of these practices and the sophisticated communication networks that must have existed among scattered populations. From the Zagros Mountains of Iraq to the river valleys of France, from the caves of Spain to the steppes of Central Asia, the archaeological record reveals consistent patterns of intentional burial that suggest shared cultural traditions maintained across vast distances and extended time periods. This consistency implies not merely local customs, but genuine cultural transmission, the preservation and communication of beliefs and practices that held meaning for Neanderthal communities throughout their extensive range and long history. The Shanidar Cave, where the remarkable individual we have already encountered lived and died, provides perhaps the most compelling evidence for the complexity of Neanderthal burial practices and the beliefs that motivated them. The discovery of multiple burials within the same cave system, each showing evidence of careful preparation and ceremonial treatment, suggests that certain locations held special significance as places where the transition from life to death should occur. The positioning of bodies within the cave followed patterns that seemed to reflect understanding of sacred space, with certain areas reserved for burial purposes and others maintained for daily living activities. This spatial organization implies sophisticated concepts about the relationship between the living and the dead, about the proper places for different types of human activity, and about the significance of physical location in ceremonial and spiritual practices. The analysis of soil samples from around the Shanidar burials revealed one of the most intriguing and controversial discoveries in the study of Neanderthal behavior: concentrations of flower pollen that suggested the deliberate placement of flowering plants around the bodies of the deceased. The species identified included yarrow, cornflower, and hollyhock, plants that would have required deliberate collection and arrangement rather than accidental accumulation through natural processes.
The symbolic implications of this practice, if confirmed, would suggest that Neanderthals understood and employed concepts of beauty, commemoration, and symbolic representation that modern cultures would immediately recognize as expressions of grief, honor, and remembrance. The controversy surrounding the flower burial evidence reveals the broader challenges faced by researchers attempting to understand the inner lives and spiritual practices of people who left no written records and whose material culture was shaped by the practical demands of survival in harsh environments. The pollen concentrations could represent deliberate ceremonial placement, but they could also result from natural processes, animal activity, or contamination from later periods. The interpretation of such evidence requires balancing the exciting possibility that these discoveries reveal sophisticated spiritual and ceremonial practices against the necessity of maintaining rigorous scientific standards and acknowledging alternative explanations for the archaeological patterns observed.
Yet, even setting aside the more controversial interpretations, the basic patterns of Neanderthal burial practices provide compelling evidence for sophisticated thinking about death, community, and meaning. The consistent effort invested in grave preparation, the careful attention to body positioning and orientation, the selection of specific locations for burial purposes, and the inclusion of materials like ochre all point to beliefs and practices that distinguished these people from other species and aligned them with the broader human tendency to find significance and meaning in mortality and commemoration. These practices required not merely intelligence, but the kind of abstract thinking and symbolic reasoning that modern researchers once assumed was uniquely associated with our own subspecies. The tools and materials found associated with Neanderthal burials provide additional insights into the beliefs and values that motivated these practices. Stone implements, carefully crafted and apparently unused, suggest offerings meant to accompany the deceased into whatever state or realm death might represent. Animal bones, arranged in patterns that seem too systematic to represent random accumulation, might indicate food offerings or symbolic representations of hunting success and survival skills. Personal ornaments, including shells and teeth modified for use as jewelry or decoration, suggest that individual identity and personal history held sufficient importance to warrant preservation and commemoration through burial practices.
The preservation conditions that have allowed modern researchers to discover and study these burial sites provide a poignant reminder of the vast spans of time that separate us from our Neanderthal relatives, and the remarkable persistence of human practices and beliefs across geological timescales. The limestone caves that sheltered these ancient communities created chemical conditions that preserved not only bones and tools, but also traces of the organic materials and environmental conditions that surrounded these ceremonial practices. The slow processes of sedimentation and mineral replacement that created the archaeological record have, in effect, created time capsules that preserve moments of profound human significance from tens of thousands of years in the past. The modern techniques that archaeologists employ to extract information from these ancient burial sites represent the application of cutting-edge science to questions about the deepest aspects of human nature and consciousness. Ground-penetrating radar reveals the locations of graves without disturbing their contents. Chemical analysis of soil samples detects traces of organic materials that have long since decomposed. Microscopic examination of bone surfaces reveals tool marks that indicate the methods used in body preparation. Three-dimensional mapping and computer modeling reconstruct burial positions and spatial relationships with precision that would have been impossible for earlier generations of researchers.
These technical capabilities have opened new windows into the practices and beliefs of people whose inner lives had previously been accessible only through speculation and inference.
The implications of Neanderthal burial practices for our understanding of human consciousness and spiritual development extend far beyond academic archaeology to touch fundamental questions about the nature of mind, meaning, and mortality that have occupied philosophers and theologians throughout recorded history. The evidence suggests that the capacity for abstract thinking about death, the motivation to engage in ceremonial practices, and the social organization necessary to maintain consistent cultural traditions across time and space were not unique developments of modern humans, but shared characteristics of the broader human family. This recognition challenges assumptions about human uniqueness while simultaneously highlighting the remarkable achievements of consciousness and culture that distinguish our species from others in the natural world. The emotional impact of standing in the presence of these ancient burial sites, of observing the careful arrangements and ceremonial materials that represent someone's final expressions of care and respect for deceased community members, transcends academic analysis to touch the fundamental human experiences of loss, memory, and hope. The ochre-stained bones and carefully positioned stone tools speak across vast spans of time to remind modern observers that grief, love, and the search for meaning in mortality are not recent human innovations, but ancient inheritances shared with relatives whose robust forms once moved through landscapes that have since been transformed by ice ages, continental drift, and the countless changes that geological time encompasses. The ongoing discoveries at Neanderthal burial sites continue to refine and expand our understanding of these practices and their significance.
New excavations reveal additional examples of intentional burial, each site contributing new details to the emerging picture of Neanderthal spiritual and ceremonial life. Advanced analytical techniques extract increasing amounts of information from previously studied remains, revealing patterns and relationships that earlier technology could not detect. The accumulating evidence builds a compelling case for sophisticated thinking about death, meaning, and community among our ancient relatives, while simultaneously raising new questions about the specific beliefs and practices that motivated their ceremonial behaviors. Beyond the silent testimony of burial practices lies another realm of mystery that speaks to the depths of Neanderthal consciousness and their engagement with concepts that transcend the immediate demands of survival. In caves scattered across Europe, in the depths of limestone chambers that have remained undisturbed for tens of thousands of years, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of activities that challenge our understanding of when humans first began to engage with abstract concepts of meaning, beauty, and the sacred. These discoveries reveal practices so unexpected and profound that they have forced researchers to reconsider fundamental assumptions about the cognitive capabilities and spiritual lives of our ancient relatives. The analysis of sediment layers and mineral deposits around these structures reveals evidence of repeated visits and continued use over extended periods, possibly spanning multiple generations of Neanderthal occupation. The accumulation patterns suggest not single events, but ongoing activities that drew community members back to these deep cave chambers repeatedly, creating traditions of use that were maintained across long spans of time.
This continuity implies the transmission of knowledge about the location and significance of these sites, possibly through oral traditions or ceremonial practices that preserved information about their importance and proper use. The symbolic implications of circular construction patterns have captured the attention of researchers studying the cognitive capabilities of Neanderthal communities. The creation of geometric forms, particularly circles, requires abstract thinking about spatial relationships and mathematical concepts that extend beyond the immediate practical needs of daily survival.
The ability to visualize and execute circular constructions suggests understanding of symmetry, proportion, and geometric principles that modern researchers had not previously associated with Neanderthal cognitive capabilities. These achievements indicate intellectual sophistication that approaches the abstract reasoning abilities that characterize modern human mathematical and artistic thinking. The social coordination required to create these underground structures reveals organizational capabilities that challenge assumptions about Neanderthal community dynamics and leadership patterns. The planning necessary to conceive these constructions, the division of labor required to execute them, and the cooperation needed to transport materials through difficult cave passages all suggest sophisticated social systems that could maintain focus and coordination on complex projects over extended periods. The ability to organize and sustain such collaborative efforts indicate communication skills and social structures that were far more advanced than early researchers assumed possible for Neanderthal communities. The religious or ceremonial interpretations of these cave structures remain speculative but compelling, particularly when considered alongside other evidence of Neanderthal symbolic behavior and spiritual practices.
The isolation of these constructions in deep cave chambers suggests activities that were deliberately separated from ordinary daily life, possibly indicating recognition of sacred spaces that required special treatment and access restrictions. The circular patterns might represent cosmological concepts, astronomical observations, or spiritual beliefs that modern minds can only dimly comprehend, but whose importance to Neanderthal communities is suggested by the enormous efforts invested in their creation and maintenance. The discovery of these cave structures has prompted archaeologists to re-examine other Neanderthal sites for evidence of similar activities that might have been overlooked or misinterpreted in previous investigations. Cave paintings and markings that were once attributed to later human populations are being reconsidered as possible Neanderthal creations. Stone arrangements and structural modifications that were previously dismissed as natural formations or accidental accumulations are being evaluated as potential evidence of intentional construction and symbolic behavior. These re-examinations have revealed additional examples of possible Neanderthal symbolic activities, creating an expanding body of evidence for cognitive and cultural capabilities that were previously unsuspected. The technical challenges involved in dating these ancient cave structures have required the development of new analytical methods and collaborative approaches that bring together experts from multiple scientific disciplines. The mineral formations and sediment deposits associated with these constructions must be analyzed using techniques that can distinguish between natural geological processes and human modifications that occurred tens of thousands of years ago.
The development of these analytical capabilities has not only confirmed the Neanderthal origin of these structures, but has also provided new tools for investigating other archaeological sites and expanding our understanding of prehistoric human activities. The international significance of these discoveries has led to collaborative research projects that bring together scientists from multiple countries and institutions, creating networks of expertise that can address the complex questions raised by these findings. The preservation and study of these cave sites requires careful coordination to ensure that archaeological investigation does not damage or destroy the very evidence that researchers are attempting to understand. The development of non-invasive analytical techniques allows detailed study while preserving these ancient structures for future generations of researchers who may possess even more sophisticated tools for extracting information from these remarkable sites. The implications of these cave structures for our understanding of Neanderthal consciousness and cultural development extend beyond archaeology to influence discussions in psychology, cognitive science, and philosophy about the nature of symbolic thinking and the development of abstract reasoning capabilities.
The evidence suggests that the capacity for geometric reasoning, spatial visualization, and symbolic representation was not a unique achievement of modern humans, but shared characteristics of the broader human family. This recognition has important implications for theories about cognitive evolution and the relationship between brain development and cultural complexity. The preservation challenges faced by these ancient cave sites highlight the vulnerability of archaeological evidence and the race against time that characterizes much of prehistoric research.
Natural processes of erosion, mineral deposition, and structural change continue to affect these caves, gradually altering or destroying evidence that has survived for tens of thousands of years. Climate change and human activities near cave entrances pose additional threats to the stability and preservation of these irreplaceable archaeological sites. The urgency of documenting and studying these locations before they are lost to natural processes adds intensity and importance to ongoing research efforts. The educational implications of these discoveries have prompted changes in curriculum and teaching approaches at universities and museums around the world as researchers work to update public understanding of Neanderthal capabilities and achievements. The traditional narrative of human cognitive and cultural development must be revised to accommodate evidence of sophisticated thinking and symbolic behavior that occurred much earlier than previously recognized. This updating process requires not merely presenting new facts, but helping students and the general public understand the significance of these discoveries for broader questions about human nature and consciousness. The technological innovations developed to study these cave structures have found applications in other areas of archaeological research and scientific investigation, demonstrating how specialized research challenges can drive broader advances in analytical capabilities. Ground-penetrating radar systems designed to map cave structures without disturbing them have proven useful for investigating other types of archaeological sites. Chemical analysis techniques developed to study ancient mineral deposits have applications in geology and materials science.
Three-dimensional mapping and modeling systems created for documenting these cave structures have found uses in engineering and architectural projects. The collaborative relationships between archaeologists and the local communities where these cave structures are located have become models for ethical and productive partnerships between researchers and the people whose heritage and landscapes are being studied. The development of these partnerships requires recognition of community interests and concerns, sharing of research findings and their implications, and collaboration in preservation efforts that balance scientific investigation with protection of cultural and natural heritage. These relationships demonstrate how archaeological research can benefit both scientific understanding and local community development while respecting the rights and interests of all involved parties. The philosophical questions raised by these cave structures touch fundamental issues about the nature of consciousness, the development of abstract thinking, and the relationship between intelligence and cultural expression that have occupied thinkers throughout human history. The evidence suggests that the capacity for symbolic reasoning, geometric thinking, and ceremonial behavior was not a recent human innovation, but an ancient inheritance shared with relatives whose robust forms and harsh living conditions had obscured recognition of their intellectual and spiritual sophistication. This recognition challenges human exceptionalism, while simultaneously highlighting the remarkable achievements of consciousness that distinguish our species family from others in the natural world.
Natural processes of erosion, mineral deposition, and structural change continue to affect these caves, gradually altering or destroying evidence that has survived for tens of thousands of years.
Climate change and human activities near cave entrances pose additional threats to the stability and preservation of these irreplaceable archaeological sites. The urgency of documenting and studying these locations before they are lost to natural processes adds intensity and importance to ongoing research efforts. The educational implications of these discoveries have prompted changes in curriculum and teaching approaches at universities and museums around the world, as researchers work to update public understanding of Neanderthal capabilities and achievements. The traditional narrative of human cognitive and cultural development must be revised to accommodate evidence of sophisticated thinking and symbolic behavior that occurred much earlier than previously recognized. This updating process requires not merely presenting new facts, but helping students and the general public understand the significance of these discoveries for broader questions about human nature and consciousness. The technological innovations developed to study these cave structures have found applications in other areas of archaeological research and scientific investigation, demonstrating how specialized research challenges can drive broader advances in analytical capabilities. Ground-penetrating radar systems designed to map cave structures without disturbing them have proven useful for investigating other types of archaeological sites. Chemical analysis techniques developed to study ancient mineral deposits have applications in geology and material science.
Imagine yourself standing before the cave walls of La Pasiega in northern Spain, your eyes adjusting to the dim light that filters through the cave entrance, while artificial illumination reveals paintings and markings that represent some of the earliest known examples of symbolic representation in human history. The red ochre handprints that decorate these limestone surfaces were created more than 65,000 years ago, predating the arrival of modern humans in Europe, and providing compelling evidence that the capacity for artistic expression and symbolic communication was not unique to our own subspecies, but shared with our Neanderthal relatives who occupied these landscapes for hundreds of thousands of years before our ancestors arrived from Africa. The technique required to create these handprints reveals sophisticated understanding of materials, methods, and artistic intention that speaks to cognitive capabilities and cultural practices of remarkable sophistication. The ochre pigment had to be carefully prepared through grinding and mixing processes that transformed raw mineral deposits into paint capable of adhering to cave walls and maintaining its color intensity across geological timespans. The application method, likely involving the use of hollow bones or reeds as spray devices to blow pigment around hands pressed against the rock surface, represents technological innovation and artistic vision that required both technical knowledge and aesthetic understanding. The positioning and arrangement of these handprints on cave walls followed patterns that suggest deliberate composition and artistic intention rather than random marking or accidental creation.
The symbolic significance of handprints as artistic subjects touches fundamental aspects of human identity and self-awareness that transcend simple decoration or marking of territory. The choice to preserve the image of one's own hand, to create a permanent record of individual presence and existence, suggests understanding of personal identity and mortality that extends beyond immediate survival concerns to encompass questions of memory, legacy, and the desire to communicate across time. These ancient handprints speak across tens of thousands of years to announce the presence of individuals who once stood in these same cave chambers, who pressed their flesh against cold stone and who chose to leave behind traces of their existence for unknown future observers to discover and interpret. The geographical distribution of these early artistic expressions reveals communication networks and cultural transmission systems that connected Neanderthal communities across vast distances and extended time periods. Similar artistic techniques and symbolic motifs appear at sites separated by hundreds of miles and thousands of years, suggesting traditions of knowledge and practice that were maintained and transmitted through generations of cultural inheritance. The consistency of these patterns implies not merely independent invention, but genuine cultural transmission, the preservation and communication of artistic knowledge and symbolic meanings that held significance for Neanderthal communities throughout their extensive range and long history. The analysis of pigment compositions and preparation techniques used in these ancient artistic works has revealed sophisticated understanding of chemistry and materials science that required experimental knowledge and accumulated expertise passed down through generations of practitioners. The creation of stable pigments required understanding of mineral properties, mixing ratios, and binding agents that would ensure color permanence and adhesion to rock surfaces. The development of application techniques required experimentation with different tools and methods to achieve desired artistic effects. This technical knowledge represents accumulated scientific understanding that was preserved and transmitted through cultural mechanisms that ensured continuity of artistic practices across generations. The discovery of perforated shells and modified animal teeth at Neanderthal sites provides evidence of personal ornamentation and symbolic behavior that extends the artistic and expressive capabilities revealed by cave paintings. These small objects, carefully modified through drilling and shaping processes, represent some of humanity's earliest examples of jewelry and personal decoration. The effort required to create these ornaments, combined with evidence of their use and preservation, suggests that concepts of beauty, personal identity, and social signaling were important aspects of Neanderthal culture that motivated investment of time and resources in activities that provided no immediate survival benefit, but contributed to social cohesion and individual expression. The techniques used to modify these shells and teeth reveal tool-making capabilities and precision work that required both technical skill and aesthetic vision. The drilling of holes through shells and teeth required specialized tools and techniques that could create openings without cracking or destroying the delicate materials. The shaping and polishing of these objects to achieve desired appearances required understanding of abrasive techniques and finishing processes that transformed raw materials into completed ornaments. The evidence suggests that these techniques were not discovered accidentally, but developed through purposeful experimentation and refinement over extended periods. The social implications of personal ornamentation extend beyond individual expression to encompass questions of group identity, social hierarchy, and communication systems that used visual symbols to convey information about status, achievements, and group membership. The patterns of ornament distribution at archaeological sites suggest that these objects served functions related to social organization and communication that went beyond simple decoration to encompass complex signaling systems that helped maintain community cohesion and individual relationships. The investment of time and resources in creating and maintaining these ornaments suggests that their social functions were sufficiently important to justify diversion of efforts from immediate survival activities. The preservation and curation of ornamental objects across multiple generations, evidenced by wear patterns and repair modifications found on archaeological specimens, reveals long-term thinking and value systems that recognized and preserved objects of cultural and personal significance.
The effort invested in maintaining and repairing damaged ornaments suggests emotional and symbolic attachments that motivated care and preservation even when practical considerations might have suggested disposal and replacement.